Hi there and welcome to my kitchen. Today we are going to be learning how to frost a cake. I will show you all of my tips and tricks on how to make that frosting smooth. You'll be a pro cake decorator in no time. So stick around and let's get to baking. Oh yeah, sorry. Do, fast forward this part. Do. What's the word? Today we are going to learn how to frost a cake. This is just a single 6-inch round chocolate cake. Normally I would make 2 of these to make a taller cake, but 1 is fine enough just to make a cake for you at home. The first thing we are going to do is cut layers in our cake. So your cake is wrapped with saran wrap. Go ahead and unwrap it. Put the saran wrap on a turntable or on a table, or the counter is just fine. I like to use a turntable because it's easier to get a cleaner cut and decorate your cake, but your countertop is just fine. Now that your cake is on your turntable, grab a serrated knife. I like this one. It's just really long and it's able to allow me to cut through any size cake. First thing you are going to do is you're going to cut the top off your cake to make it level. You want to get eye level, and you can see where your cake is higher and where it's lower. So you want to put your knife here and just start going back and forth. Now, a lot of people like to go directly through cake. I don't like to do that. I like to turn my turntable and then keep my knife in the same position. That way I know that the knife isn't moving and it's just going to be the same all the way through. Now that you have your top cut off, you want to look at it eye level again, and it looks pretty straight. Go ahead and put your knife halfway on your cake. So you want to cut the cake in half. It's about halfway right now, and we're going to start sawing it back and forth like we did before, and just move your turntable until you reach the same spot. And at that point, you can start bringing your knife in more on the interior of the cake and all the way through. And now we have a very clean cut. Put that aside and we will get our cake board ready for our cake. One of my favorite tips while decorating a cake is to use one of these silicone heat pads. You can get these at any cake or kitchen store. These are just hot pads that you can take stuff out of the oven, but when you put them on a turntable, it allows the cake board to stick to it better than if the cake board was just on the turntable. That's a little tip for you, especially for smaller cakes. Smaller cakes are not as heavy, so they won't be weighted down as much on your cake board. Put your silicone pad on your turntable and then put your cake board on top of that. And the first thing that you're gonna do is you're gonna put just a dab of frosting on that cake board. And frosting, whenever we think about cake decorating, frosting is considered the glue that puts the cake together. The glue on the cake board is going to allow the cake to not slide once it's all finished. So we have our cake now on top of that little dab of frosting. I'm using here an offset spatula. This is perfect for cake decorating because it is not a straight line, it's offset. It really allows you to create smooth lines and smooth layers for your cakes. Now that we have our cake on our cake board, we are going to do our first layer of frosting. Now you can just pile frosting on here, or you can grab a piping bag and just start spinning and putting your frosting on the cake like that. It really doesn't matter, you just need frosting. I like to just blob it on there and then grab my offset spatula and then just push it around until it's even. And you always want to keep your offset spatula level to the cake and push the frosting around just ever so slightly. It always helps to have a separate bowl ready for you when you're frosting a cake. What we want to do is we want to prevent crumbs from getting into our clean bowl of frosting. So anytime that you're using a spatula on a cake, you want to just take the excess frosting off of your spatula into a clean bowl, and that will be our crumb bowl. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk about doing a crumb coat later, but just for now, we want to make sure that we don't get any crumbs in our bowl of frosting. Now that we have our first layer of frosting on our cake, we want to again go eye level and just make sure that the cake is level as can be. And this is more important when creating larger cakes. This cake is so small and tiny that it doesn't really matter, but we still want to be in the right practice for when we do have bigger cakes. Here's our first layer. Now, if you're not doing any ingredients, any toppings in the middle of your cake, you can just take your second layer of cake and place it on top. But today I'm gonna fill my cake with some Reese's chips, just to make it like a chocolate Reese's peanut butter cake. What you wanna do anytime you have a filling is grab your piping bag, and you want to create essentially a border around your cake so that none of the fillings escape. Now that we have a border there, we have a little wall, we can put whatever filling we want inside. It could be a liquid filling, it could be, pieces of cookie, it could be candy, whatever you want. That little border just helps secure your filling so it doesn't start leaking out of the side of the cake. So I'm putting as many in here as I can. You just want to do a thin layer, and then we can put our second piece of cake on top of this. Now, normally we would have 2 cakes that we would be building up high, and the reason for that is the bottom cake, the cake that's touching the cake board, is always going to be a bottom portion of the cake, and the last layer that we put on the cake is going to be the other 6-inch bottom too. So it's kind of like sandwiching the cake just to make sure that it's square. Now today we only have 1 6-inch, so we don't have that square top like we normally do, but that's fine. So we're just gonna grab our second layer here and place it on top. All right, now again, we wanna get eye level with the cake and just adjust it if it's off a little bit. If it's higher in one particular spot, you can just push it down just a little bit. What I like to do as well for larger cakes, I like to grab another round piece and put it on top of my cake and use a level to make sure that my cake is like perfectly level. That really helps in stacking higher cakes. That could be another tip for you when you get further down the road and you're making 12-inch cakes, 10-inch cakes. Levels are very helpful in that regard. Now we have come to the part where we want to do a crumb coat. A crumb coat just ensures that all the crumbs stay in the cake and are not going to end up on the outside of your cake. The general rule of thumb here is you don't want to dip your spatula that has crumbs on it and has already been touching your cake. You don't want to dip that back into your bowl of frosting that is crumb free. So we have a crumb bowl and a clean bowl. I would recommend getting a separate spoon just so you can grab your frosting and dump it onto your cake. That way you don't have any crumbs in your clean bowl of frosting. We're going to grab some of our frosting and just plop it on top of our cake here. Yum. And just gently start pushing the frosting around until it gets to the entire surface of the cake. And you can also, again here, go eye level and see if you're on the right track. Now that we have the top done, we want to get the sides. You want to make sure that your offset spatula is straight up and down. You don't want it to be at an angle because you don't want your cake to be at an angle. Again, we want to go eye level with the cake and just keep the spatula pretty much in the same spot, and we want to move the cake on the turntable. So your spatula isn't really doing all the work, it's really the turntable that's doing the work. If you can see here, I have crumbs on the spatula. We're gonna wipe it in our crumb bowl and continue back onto our cake. So now that the majority of the sides are done, we're just gonna do kind of like a cleanup here. If you notice, there are going to be spots in your cake that have holes. What we wanna do is I'm going to put some of this frosting into my crumb bowl, and that way I can use it to fill these little gaps, and I don't have to worry about contaminating my clean bowl of frosting. Here's a gap right here. We're just gonna fill it in. And here's another gap. We're just gonna fill it in. Don't have to worry about being clean. We just wanna make sure everything is filled in. Here's another gap right here. And another one right here. Great. You always wanna make sure that you clean off your spatula and then get back to work. All right, so we are going to just one final turn here for our crumb coat. There's a piece of the cake that was not cooperating with us, so we're just gonna be gentle there. Okay, now look at eye level again and take off any excess that might be on the top of the cake. And this doesn't have to be perfect. This is our crumb coat. We will be going over this again later. We will be adding more frosting to this. So this does not have to be perfect. This is just containing all the crumbs. This is pretty much done. What I like to do here is remove the excess frosting from the cake board just to keep it clean. And then we are going to pop this in the refrigerator for just a little bit until the frosting hardens. And we're gonna add our second coat of frosting onto this. So put it in the fridge and I'll see you once that is done. Now that our cake is out of the refrigerator, we are going to put our final coat of frosting on top of it and get ready to decorate the outside of it. Now we have our crumb coat bowl of frosting. We want to put that aside. We don't want any more crumbs for our cake. So we now want to clean our spatula. Just make sure it's clean and crumb free. And we can now dip that into our clean bowl of frosting. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to grab some of our frosting with our spatula and start coating the sides of our cake. Now we're gonna be using a lot of frosting and you're gonna think that is way too much, but don't worry, we're gonna scrape it off at the end. When I first started doing cakes, I thought, oh my gosh, that is gross, that is so much frosting, but like, don't worry, we're gonna scrape it off. I mean, if you love frosting, then get excited. What I like to do is I like to just grab some frosting on my offset spatula like this. And again, we're going to look at the side of our cake and we're just gonna place it directly on the cake and just keep going around your cake and put a bunch of frosting. Do you see how much frosting I'm putting on here? We're going to be putting a lot of frosting because ideally we want to just cover the whole cake. And when we scrape off the frosting later, we want to make sure that we have enough frosting so that we're not going to be scraping directly on our cake. Put as much frosting as you can onto this cake, and we should have no crumbs because we've done a crumb coat. So just keep going. Now that we have the base of the cake done, we're going to do the top portion of the side. Do the same thing, but do it a little higher on the cake and go all the way around. All right, the third step here is we are going to fill the top of the cake with the rest of our frosting here. Now, it doesn't have to be too much because we have a good amount of frosting already on there. So go ahead and just smooth that out. And we're smoothing it out so it touches the edge of the frosting that we just put on the side. So it kind of is like a hat on the cake. And it just fills in all the gaps. All right, now that we have the excess frosting on our cake, we're just gonna make it smooth. And with that, we always want to make sure that our spatula is clean this entire time. So grab an extra napkin, and you're going to want to clean that off when you get towards the end of the process, just to make sure your offset spatula is as clean as possible. Right now, I'm going to get eye level, and I'm going to make sure my offset spatula is straight up and down, and your spatula stays in the same spot while your cake is rotating. If you see, the spatula doesn't move. That way we get an equal amount of frosting on each side. One tip that I have for you is how to rotate your turntable while you're frosting your cake. It's really important that you do a full rotation without stopping at all, which can be a little difficult if you're just rotating like this. So what you want to do is you want to grab the turntable on the opposite side, and that way when you're spinning, your hand can go all the way around and your spatula doesn't move. So start practicing that. It takes a little bit to get used to it, but that way you don't have any breaks in your frosting. It's still a little rough, so I'm just gonna keep doing what we're doing and I'll show you the final product. All right, now we're getting towards the end where our napkin is going to come into play. When you are taking the excess frosting from the side here, you want to pull it in towards the center of the cake. That will make your edges nice and clean. And you always want to make sure that your offset spatula is clean when you're doing these final touches. So bring those edges in. And there we have a nice cake. Next, we want to make sure that all of the sides are clean on the board before we do any decorating on here. So grab your napkin and clean off the board. Great, good job, you guys. Now, from this point, you can do whatever you would like with your cake. This is just a blank canvas, but feel free to decorate it however you want. If you have a piping bag with a star tip, you can do a lot with that. You can do little swirly-doos on top, or you can do some trimming on the bottom of your cake. So there's lots that can be done to this, but this is just a general how to frost a cake. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time for another baking endeavor with Beth. Cheers!